Radio TV Phono Nut here, and today we're using the older camera because it'll take less time to process the video, and I don't have a lot of time to devote to this right now, and I'm hoping this video won't take very long. But what we have blown apart here is a Gemini 3-speed belt drive DJ turntable, although I can't imagine any DJ worth their salt using anything like this. I wouldn't think belt drive would be too good for that. But the only reason I bought this is because it has 78 RPM speed and it was cheap. This is one of those where you press one button for 33, the 45 button for 45, or for 78, you press both buttons down and you see both lights illuminate. And we have 78 RPM or thereabouts. This also has a reverse feature on it. For listening to satanic messages on Black Sabbath albums. That would certainly be a feature I would never use. But anyway, when I got this turntable, I placed the strobe disc on it and the speeds were way off. I was able to get 45 and 33 dialed in pretty close, or excuse me, 45 and 78 dialed in pretty close with the trim pots on the circuit board here. However, 33 is still running a tad fast, and I have the pot all the way to the extreme rotation, so we're going to have to do something about that. This here is our pitch slider, and yes, I have the knob removed because we're going to be pulling the board out in a minute, and we also have the head shell and the counterweight removed for safety purposes while working on this. This came with a pretty generic Audio-Technica AT3600 cartridge, which is what a lot of these come with. And also, when I got this, the collar was loose and I had to tighten the screw under here. The tone arm lift still doesn't work right. It will not go high enough to elevate the arm off of the record. So we'll try to look into that, but the main thing I want to do is get our speed correct. Okay, you really can't tell on the camera, but with a 33 pot cranked all the way as far over as it will go, the lines are marching to the left a bit, which means this is running too fast. I can let it go at that, but I know that's not proper. You know, it should not be at the end of its rotation for close to normal speed. Alright, on 45, marching to the left a little bit, but we really can't. Those trim parts are so touchy that we really can't get an exact speed. It's either a tad too fast or a tad too slow. And given our options, I'd rather it be a tad too fast. And then 78. Same deal with that. So we need to look in to see what I can do to give us a little more range on that 33 pot and try to get it as slow as we can, or shall we say, let me rephrase that, try to get it as close to normal as we can get it. Okay, measuring the resistance of this trim pot for 33, at our slowest speed setting, we read 415 ohms, and the lower the resistance of that pot, the faster it runs. So they have this pot wired as a rheostat, and you can see it runs down through here, and we have a jumper here. So I think what we need to do is remove that jumper and place a resistor where that jumper was, and then we ought to be able to more easily dial in 33 on this thing. Like I may have already said, this is probably not the proper way to do this, but it's not like you can get service information or parts or anything like that for these cheaper turntables. You just have to fix them the best way you can. Okay, we have our jumper removed from the line from the 33 RPM trim pot, and we have a 150 ohm resistor tacked in, and we'll see if our pot has enough range now. and if it does, we'll permanently install that resistor, and if it doesn't, then we'll go up to a bigger resistor. Okay, I think 150 ohm is going to do the trick. The needle in this thing's roached out, but I still have it on an old junk record to provide some tone arm drag, and I have all three speeds adjusted. It's slightly fast, but I don't think the average person would be able to tell the difference. So now we need to remove the board and permanently attach this resistor, and then we'll be good to go. Okay, the resistor is now in place, and I just thought I'd let you look at the component side of this circuit board. Basically, the way the speed is controlled is very similar to what's on your typical Crosley suitcase record player, except in this case they have the motor speed regulator IC on this circuit board as opposed to mounted directly on the motor like what's in the Crosley models. And also the Crosley models and others have a 3-position slide switch, whereas this particular model uses a microprocessor and logic gates to select between the 3 speeds. Really, it would have been cheaper for them to make this with a 3-position slide switch and save all of this. I mean, after all, this is they were trying to make these things cheap, and they could have gone a step further and eliminated the microprocessor and just used a 3-position switch. I think Gemini still offers this turntable. I think it's around $150. It's really not much of a turntable. It'll do in a tight, I suppose, but there's really not much to this. If you were doing archival work, then you would probably want something a little better. Personally, I'd like to get my hands on a Technics SP-15 radio station turntable, but most of the radio stations that had them threw them all out in the early to mid-90s, and the ones you find now are way up in price, out of my budget at the present time. Too bad I can't go back 30 years and go around to some of these radio stations and could have probably gotten one for free or pretty cheap. So putting the board back in, when I tighten these screws down, the reverse button will not function. It stays in the on position, the closed position, which freezes up the mechanism. So guess what? These 2 screws can just stay out. The board's not going anywhere. I know that's not the right attitude, but given the piece of junk that this is anyway, I'm not too concerned about it. Okay, we're all back together, and it's as close as I can get it. I really can't do a sound test right now since the needle is shot, but I did measure the continuity across the RCA jacks with the switch set to bypass the preamp, and we have continuity on both channels, so I have every reason to believe this thing would probably work. I did not mess with the cueing lever either. Frankly, it just slipped my mind, and it's no big deal because I rarely ever use the cueing lever anyhow. In fact, this is probably going to be something I end up handing off to somebody in the first place, so it's no big deal. It is what it is, a cheap piece of junk turntable. And we have an Audio-Technica and an Optimus turntable, both cheapies that we modified for 3-speed. We have this 3-speed one. We have a Newmark and a Stanton direct drive 3-speed, but even those are really nothing to write home about in the grand scheme of things. Okay, we've been on a little while now, and it seems to be holding speed. So that's good. Now, one thing they should have incorporated in these kind of turntables is a built-in strobe. Anything with variable pitch control should have a built-in strobe, like all turntables with pitch used to have. I've got a similar looking Newmark turntable, except it's 2-speed, and it does okay for what it is. I swapped out the original cartridge for an old Shure M75 that I had on hand, but once again, no strobe. And even Crosley had a similar 2-speed turntable to this one. There was also an Ion brand that was similar to the 2-speed Newmark, except it had a plastic platter. But yeah, They really should have put a built-in strobe in these, and that way you could calibrate your speed without having to have one of these strobe discs. And now I'll give you a sneak peek at a real turntable that you'll see in a future video. This is a Presto Model T18 3-speed broadcast turntable from about 1956. This came in two versions. The better version had the Ashland synchronous motor, and the lesser version had the General Industries constant speed motor. This one unfortunately has the General Industries motor, but we're not going to complain about it. There's still good turntables, and the tone arm is a Gray Research viscous damped 16-inch tone arm. Now the platter is only 12 inches, but because of the tone arm, I can play 16-inch records on this. Of course, the record will hang off the side, but you know, that's just the way it is. What I'd like to find is one of the old Gates or Collins or QRK or Reco Cut or whatever broadcast turntables with the 16-inch platter, but those tend to go for way more than my budget is right now. In fact, this one here wasn't cheap. Not going to mention what I paid for it. We'll just say it wasn't cheap. This wasn't a freebie, and it wasn't a $10 yard sale purchase. Let's just leave it at that. This is one of those situations where I'd been looking for a turntable set up like this for years, and every radio station I checked with pretty much told me, no, we don't have anything like that. We threw that kind of stuff out years ago. Now, I did get some of the old 12-inch Rusco QRK variety type turntables from an older gentleman several years ago, but you know, those have the arm, the shorter tone arm, that will not accommodate 16-inch records. This one here, we can at least play 16-inch records on it. Now, back in the day, these Gray Research tone arms were common as dirt. About every radio station in America had them, but then as stereo records became the norm, and records with more bass and all that required better tracking tone arms became the norm, the Gray Research arms disappeared and were replaced with arms such as the Microtrack 303 or the Audio Technica tone arms. As far as this turntable here, someone installed a Sonotone 8T ceramic cartridge. At one time, we can tell that this had a GE variable reluctance cartridge with a little red knob sticking out the top to select between LP and 78. I highly suspect all of this came out of a radio station, and then whenever it was taken out of service at a radio station, somebody got the pieces and built this base to put them in. And they did a very sloppy job here. As you can see, the arm is not mounted very well, and the wiring for the tone arm is just hanging loose back here. I don't like that at all. That will have to be corrected. Originally, this would have been a mono tone arm, but somebody rewired it for stereo, and you can see how slowly it drops there. That's the damping properties of this tone arm. And here it is with the platter removed. As you can tell, this is a pretty massive platter on here. Not as massive as the old Gates and QRK models, but still a massive turntable by today's standards anyway. And you can see we have 3 idler wheels, one for each speed, 45, off, 33, off, and then 78. And I really wish they would have mounted this in a base where this was facing the front instead of it being at an angle here, but whoever built this probably only used it for 33 and 45, so 78 probably wasn't a big concern to them. Here's the underside showing the motor. It's a pretty good sized motor there, and it looks like it's date stamped 1956. and the tone arm would be from about the same period. And the time left, I'll tell you my Technics SP-15 story. About 20 years ago, I bid on one on eBay, and like so many other auctions, got outbid by a sniper during the last 6 seconds. Well, that was back when everybody could see all of the bidder user IDs. And within 10 minutes of the auction closing, I got a message from this character that says, I see where you were recently outbid on a Technics SP-15 turntable. I refurbished those, and I have one that's been recapped, ready to go. I'll sell you for, I think he wanted $350 for it. Well, I had the good sense to pay with PayPal, but still, the buyer protection stuff that's in place now wasn't fully in place back then, and I paid for it. A couple of weeks went by, no turntable. So I messaged the guy, and he kept making excuse after excuse after excuse after excuse. And finally, I just opened a PayPal claim, and that finally got his attention. And then he finally sent the turntable, and it was missing the platter mat. So I emailed him about that before I even had a chance to test it. And, oh, I forgot to enclose it. I'll send it to you. Well, then when I tested the turntable, it did not work. It was all wonky. The speeds were all over the place. I messaged him about that. Naturally, he just couldn't understand how that happened because he'd recapped it and he'd done this and he'd done that. And, well, he wanted me to send it back to him for repair, and I was a little bit leery about doing that, especially after I opened the turntable up and saw where it had not been serviced at all. I think what was wrong with that turntable was one of the unavailable chips at the time was bad. I think you can get them now, but they're very expensive. So he just saw a sucker and put a junk turntable off on me for over $300. And long story short, I didn't send it back to him. I ended up getting so mad, I ended up smashing the turntable in 10 million pieces and throwing it in the garbage, and swore that I'd never buy another one. Now, I've come off of that a little bit now, but if I ever buy another SP-15, it's either got to be very cheap, or it's got to be from a reputable seller with some kind of guarantee, or I know I've got some recourse if one shows up that is a dud. Now, I understand things happen. Even when you restore something, something can go wrong, but whenever he lied to me and told me it had been recapped and re-this and re-that, and I opened it up and find no evidence of work being done, now that tells me we're dealing with a shyster. Alright, enough for now. Okay, I went and dumped the memory card. I can't believe I forgot to tell you this little story regarding the Technics SP-15. I forgot what radio station, but I saw this on one of the Facebook groups, one of the radio broadcasting groups of some college radio station somewhere that in recent years still had a pair of Technics SP-15s in the control room, and this station still played vinyl on the air. And the powers that be decided that old junky Technics turntables had to go, and they replaced them with crappy Newmark turntables similar to the Gemini that we just worked on. Now, anybody who would throw out a Technics SP-15, even though they have their quirks, but anybody who would throw out a Technics SP-15 and replace it with a crappy Newmark or Ion or Gemini belt-driven DJ turntable, they need their head examined in the worst kind of way. And I can believe somebody did that because, you know, there are a lot of people with that mentality, oh, well, it's old, so it must not be any good. This lightweight thing must be loads better than that old obsolete thing is, so let's just throw the old one out and replace it with this new Chinese piece of modern technology. Or another possibility is the powers that be wanted the Technics turntables for themselves, so they finagled a way to get the school to replace them with Newmark turntables, and the Technics turntables conveniently went home with somebody. Now that's also a possibility. Now, as far as 78 work, Sirius 78 playback, really your best bet is a Technics SP-15 or SP-10 3-speed turntable. Now, I think the first version of the SP-10 was only a 2-speed model, but the 3-speed SP-10 or SP-15 are excellent choices because both of those will allow you to vary the speed and have rock-solid speed stability. And they will also accommodate a 16-inch disc with the right tone arm. Another good option is a modified Technics SL-1200 Mark II. Now, unfortunately, the modification for that is more than just changing a resistor or two. There is a company who modifies those, I think, for about $250. And it basically involves an auxiliary circuit board with some ICs on it mounted to the main circuit board, and from what I've seen of the conversion, it's well worth the $250. I don't think any one of us could do it any cheaper if we had to buy the parts and fabricate the circuit boards and all that sort of thing. So I've actually been toying around with the fact of sending my 1200 off and having it converted to a 3-speed. Now, there's also the Audio Technica, AT-LP120 that I've heard some favorable things about, but I've also heard they're kind of cheaply made too. You know, I guess for what they are, they're okay, but they're no Technics by any sense of the word. But anyway, I guess I've rambled on enough now. I don't know when we'll get to this Presto turntable, but we'll get to it one day or one year. But at least it'll be here whenever we have time to get to it. You know, we have to get this stuff when we can get it, and then we just sit on it until the appropriate time comes to work on it. But anyway, I hope you got something out of all of this. And like I said, the way we fixed the Gemini might not be the correct way, but you know, with no parts availability, no service information, sometimes you just have to do whatever works, and that's what we did in the case of that Gemini. I'm not interested in spending a bunch of time or effort or money on it. You know, it's a cheap turntable, and it is what it is.